Cyclescapes is a virtual reality cycling game that attempts to gamify exercise for hospital patients, particularly children between the ages of 6 and 18 with end-stage renal disease, also known as kidney failure. ESRD is a long-term result of a gradual loss of kidney function, where the kidney is no longer able to filter out dangerous levels of fluids building up in the body. To filter out these dangerous levels of fluids, patients undergo a treatment called dialysis. Children who have ESRD undergoing dialysis make on average about 3 hospital visits per week, where these visits last from 3 to 5 hours per session and are vital to maintaining their health. However, all this time required to receive treatment takes away from the typical childhood activities. Furthermore, they spend a lot of time confined within the hospital, sedentary and isolated. This disproportionate amount of time spent in the hospital has negative consequences on these patients, such as fatigue, poor physical functioning, and social isolation. In Cyclescapes, the player is immersed in a virtual environment which they navigate through on a stationary bike. The virtual environment mimics areas from around the world, so it feels like the players are actually biking outdoors in places they would be familiar with, or even places they have always wanted to go, taking them away from the solitude and isolation from being stuck in a hospital. Furthermore, it provides an engaging form of exercise to counteract long periods where the child would otherwise be stationary while doing their treatment.
Cyclescape will be used in a 2-phase study that aims to analyze the effects of 12 weeks of virtual reality-based exercise during dialysis on the well-being of children. The feasibility of such a game during dialysis will be evaluated as well to ensure that the game won't interfere with the tasks of the patients, caregivers, and medical health professionals. Cyclescape was implemented in the Unity game engine in the C# programming language. We worked on Cyclescape with another group, and so we divided up the modules between us. Its implementation is divided into 2 large modules, Game Manager and System Manager. The Game Manager contains modules such as the in-game UI, the map generation, the Vehicle Manager, which handles movement since the player will be in a vehicle, player control and equipment, and Environment Manager, which handles environmental effects, enemies, and interactables. The System Manager contains modules such as the Caretaker user interface and the file system that contains the map data and user profiles. One of the design challenges that came with making this game was accounting for motion sickness. Virtual reality users are prone to motion sickness all the time. We approached this challenge by keeping good virtual reality development practices, such as avoiding abrupt turns or changes in speed, and keeping the number of objects in the scene low. Another challenge we had was making the game fit our target audience, children between ages 6 to 18 with limited physical capabilities. This means that we had to make the gameplay controls and difficulty conform to what our target audience is capable of doing. We also had to make the game age appropriate, meaning minimal to no violence and no blood or gore.
One difficulty that was faced by all of this year's projects, given the current state of the world, was that regular in-person collaboration was basically impossible. This was uniquely challenging for our project because a combination of financial barriers and global hardware shortages meant that only one developer between both groups assigned to this project actually had a VR headset to develop with. Expecting one person to test each component of a project with so many interconnected parts was neither fair nor an efficient use of time, so an input manager was programmed to provide VR controller emulation on desktop, allowing for development and testing on both platforms with no additional code. In the same vein, most of us were programming on laptops with no dedicated graphics processor, making the testing in later stages of the project cumbersome. With this in mind, variable quality settings were used, and the game has been designed for relatively low-spec and inexpensive hardware.
Now we're going to delve a little bit deeper into map generation and what that entails. The route, meaning the thin green line that you can see inside the Unity editor at the bottom half, is generated with the large array of triples, each denoting the latitude, longitude, and height values of the path that are created from the Google Maps API. This enables the generated path to match the route that you can see on the top half. The Google Map values are exported to a .kml file, processed with the Cyclescapes map data module, which are then put into a simple .txt file with all the path nodes, which are then converted to a smooth Bezier path game object with code. This ensures that 1 meter in real life is actually equivalent to 1 meter in the real world. We wanted to make sure that it took the same amount of time to bike in our game as it would in real life from 2 specific points. This was a major design process to make the route in the game exactly the same in real life, but the payoff is definitely worth it. The in-game terrain is built around this path with the same scale as the route, creating a geography similar to what would be seen in real life. Another design challenge was continuously tweaking the scale, rotation, inflection, and resolution of the height map on this terrain to exactly match the Bezier curve once it was generated. To do this, we used a heat map derived from a website called tangrams.github.io/heatmapper. In this picture, you can see a detailed heat map of the Great Lakes. A heat map is a simple black and white image that can be programmatically manipulated to give us a set of heights. In this model, 0 meters represents sea level. Each pixel has a lightness value associated with it, where 0 is black and 1 is white. The lighter an area on the image is, the closer it is to the sky, and the darker an area on an image is, the closer it is to the sea level. In this image, Great Lakes are dark because they are almost at sea level, and the mountain ranges near the east coast are white. There were some major design challenges for the heat map to terrain conversion while using this in our Unity editor. As we zoom out, the image gets darker and the range of the heights increases with the Rockies coming into view from the bottom left. As we zoom out, the height ranges get bigger and there are less pixels per piece of land, which means we get a less accurate result for any particular location. This is an issue when trying to map the scale of an entire city. This was solved through a balancing act between file size, the detail resolution of the heat map at any one zoom level, and the complex act of efficiently feeding, processing, and generating such a big array of values from the image. The final values generated create chunks of terrain to be loaded and unloaded as the player bikes through the visible world. There are 14 by 14 chunks rendered around the player at any one time. That is, a radius of 7 chunks in any given direction. As the whole heat map is generated, terrain does not need to be shown at all times, only as far as the player can see. This solves a massive design challenge for rendering the environment with a high frame rate on VR. This is because VR takes twice the regular computing power since it has to render an image for each eye on the VR rig. Here we have created a demo with Hamilton being the location chosen. As you can see, we have actual height map values loaded. So this is how Hamilton would be if there were no trees and there were no buildings and just the terrain as it is. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope this gave some insight into cyclescapes. I hope one day you'll all be able to try it out at your local hospital.